The richest man in the world claims he lives in a $50,000 prefab box near a rocket launch site. But insider reports suggest he has quietly built a sprawling Texas compound worth tens of millions where his 14 children and their mothers can all live together. So which story is true? And what's actually happening in Elon's massive Texas ranch? Let's find out. Chapter 1. The Tale of Two Homes. Here's the official narrative that Elon Musk himself wants you to believe. He lives in a tiny 400-square-foot boxable prefab house near SpaceX's Starbase facility in Boca Chica, Texas. Cost? Around $50,000. Features? Bed, small kitchen, bathroom, nothing fancy. Just a billionaire roughing it near the rockets, living simple while building the future. Elon has repeated this story in interviews, on podcasts, to anyone who will listen. He sold his California mansions, ditched material possessions, and now exists in this glorified camping trailer because luxury distracts from the mission. Getting humanity to Mars, solving AI safety, accelerating sustainable energy. And honestly, it's perfect branding. The richest man in the world sleeping in a box while engineering companies that could reshape civilization. Humble, relatable, anti-establishment. Everything Elon's public persona is built on. But here's where the cracks start showing. Multiple reports over the past few years claim Elon has quietly assembled a massive real estate portfolio in Austin, about 4 hours north of Starbase. We're talking tens of millions spent on adjacent properties in an exclusive neighborhood, creating what some describe as a private compound where his sprawling family, all 14 children from multiple relationships, can live in close proximity. Neighbors in Austin's upscale Tarrytown area have complained to local media about construction activity ramping up, heavy security presence, gates appearing where none existed before, and the entire vibe of the neighborhood shifting from quiet residential to something resembling a fortress. One neighbor told reporters it feels like the whole block has been transformed into Elon's private estate. Another mentioned spotting armed security personnel stationed around properties. Construction permits filed with the city suggest significant renovations and expansions happening across multiple lots. When pressed about these reports, Elon has denied building a family compound, calling the stories exaggerated. But he hasn't denied owning multiple Austin properties. And when you're worth over $400 billion with 14 kids scattered across different relationships, the logistics of family life get complicated fast. So what's the truth? Does Elon actually live full-time in that tiny Starbase box? Or is there a hidden Texas empire most people don't see? Because when you start digging into his Texas connections, the story gets way more interesting than just a simple prefab house. Chapter 2. Why Texas? The Escape from California. Elon Musk didn't just wake up one day and decide Texas sounded fun. His move in 2020 was calculated, strategic, and driven by rage at California's government. The breaking point came during the pandemic when California shut down Tesla's Fremont factory despite Elon's very public protests. He was furious, tweeting insults at officials, threatening to move Tesla out of state, calling the shutdown fascist. California didn't budge, so Elon did. Texas offered everything California didn't. No state income tax, which for someone whose net worth swings by billions daily means saving hundreds of millions annually. Business-friendly regulations that don't require fighting bureaucrats for every permit. Cheaper land where you can build massive facilities without neighbors complaining. And a government that rolled out the red carpet, offering tax incentives and zero pushback. But it wasn't just about money and regulations. Elon needed space. Literal physical space to build what he wanted without California's Coastal Commission blocking ocean access or environmental groups suing over every construction project. SpaceX's Starbase facility sits on hundreds of acres in Boca Chica, right on the Gulf of Mexico. Perfect for rocket launches without the restrictions that made expanding operations in California nearly impossible. Tesla followed with a massive gigafactory in Austin, churning out Model Ys and Cybertrucks while employing over 20,000 people. The Boring Company set up shop testing tunnel boring technology. Neuralink established facilities for brain-computer interface development. Suddenly, Elon's entire empire was pivoting to Texas, and he moved right along with it. Now here's where the timeline gets interesting. In 2020, Elon famously declared he was selling almost all physical possessions, and wouldn't own a house. He sold multiple California mansions, a Bel Air estate he'd bought from Gene Wilder, several Brentwood properties, luxury homes that had defined his LA life. The narrative was clear. Elon was shedding material wealth to focus purely on mission. No distractions, no luxury, just work. But while he was publicly divesting from California real estate, he was quietly acquiring property in Texas. And not just one house, multiple properties, adjacent lots, creating something that would eventually raise serious questions about what exactly he was building and who it was for. Because managing 14 children from different relationships when you're constantly flying between companies isn't simple. It requires infrastructure. And Elon, for all his talk about living simply, is nothing if not a problem solver. Chapter 3. The Austin Compound. Nobody talks about. So here's what we know from various reports, property records, and neighbor complaints, even though Elon pushes back on the specifics. Starting around 2021, Elon began purchasing properties in Austin's Tarrytown neighborhood, one of the city's most exclusive areas known for waterfront access, massive lots, and homes that easily hit 8 figures. One property reportedly cost around $12 million, a spacious estate with privacy, room for family, and enough land to feel isolated despite being in the city. Then came additional purchases, adjacent lots, nearby homes, properties that when combined would create a contiguous private compound. The alleged goal? Create a setup where Elon's 14 children and their mothers could all live in close proximity, allowing the kids to grow up together while maintaining separate households for each mother. Think about the logistics for a second. Elon has children with his ex-wife Justine Wilson, twins and triplets through IVF after their first son tragically died as an infant. He has children with musician Grimes, including a son with one of the most baffling names in human history, XAAZ, which somehow gets pronounced X-A12. He has children with Shivan Zilis, an executive at Neuralink, and reportedly a child with influencer Ashley St. Clair, though details there remain murky. Managing co-parenting across all these relationships when you're running SpaceX, Tesla, X, Neuralink, XAI, and the boring companies simultaneously? That's a scheduling nightmare. So the idea of centralizing everyone in one Texas compound where Elon can visit different households without cross-country flights actually makes practical sense. Neighbors started noticing changes, construction crews working long hours, security personnel appearing where they'd never been before, gates and fencing going up. The vibe of a normally quiet, wealthy neighborhood shifting towards something more fortress-like. Some neighbors complained to Austin media outlets about noise, about feeling their privacy invaded, about the transformation of residential streets into what felt like a private estate. One told a reporter it seemed like Elon was buying up the whole block. Property records, though often obscured through LLCs and trusts when billionaires are involved, suggested significant investment in the area. Building permits filed with the city indicated major renovations and expansions happening simultaneously across multiple properties. When reporters asked Elon directly about building a family compound, he denied it, calling the stories overblown. But he didn't deny owning multiple Austin properties. And the construction activity, the security presence, the neighbor complaints, none of that disappeared just because Elon said it wasn't happening. So what's the reality? Probably something between the extremes. Elon likely does own multiple Austin homes, providing comfortable private accommodations for his various family situations. Whether it's a fully integrated compound or just strategically purchased adjacent properties is semantic. The point is, there's infrastructure beyond that tiny Starbase box. But to understand why Elon splits his story between humble simplicity and hidden luxury, you've got to look at Starbase itself, because that's where his Texas narrative really lives. Chapter 4. Starbase, where rockets meet reality. Let's talk about Starbase because this is where Elon's Texas story gets genuinely wild. Boca Chica sits at the southern tip of Texas near Brownsville, right on the Gulf of Mexico. It used to be a quiet, almost forgotten village, mostly empty land, a few scattered houses, retirees enjoying cheap coastal living. Then SpaceX arrived and transformed it into something out of science fiction. The facility now sprawls across hundreds of acres. Massive hangars house Starship prototypes taller than buildings. Launch towers rise like industrial cathedrals. You can watch rockets being assembled, tested, fueled, and launched from what feels like the edge of civilization. And according to Elon, this is where he lives. The boxable prefab house he claims as his primary residence sits right there at Starbase, a modular unit that can be transported and assembled quickly, costing around $50,000, measuring roughly 400 square feet. Bed, small kitchen, bathroom, basic furniture. No luxury finishes, no sprawling space, just function. Elon's logic is straightforward. When your goal is colonizing Mars and building reusable rockets, you don't need a mansion. You need proximity to the work. Living at Starbase means he can walk outside and watch Starship tests. He can sit with engineers during overnight problem-solving sessions. When launches happen at 3 a.m., he's right there, not flying in from some distant estate. People who've visited describe an environment that's genuinely Spartan. The house has basic furniture, minimal decoration, nothing screaming wealth or comfort. It's functional shelter near the most important work Elon's doing. But here's the question nobody asks directly. Does Elon actually live there full-time? Or is it more like an on-site crash pad with a bed? Because running Tesla requires being in Austin for gigafactory operations. Running X means time in San Francisco. Managing Neuralink, xAI, the Boring Company, all demand physical presence at different facilities. Elon's not spending 365 days a year in Boca Chica sleeping in a prefab box. He's splitting time based on where critical problems need solving. The Starbase house is real. Elon does stay there during intense SpaceX work periods. But it's one piece of a larger infrastructure supporting his insane schedule, not the complete picture of how the richest man in the world actually lives. And when you look at how he spends his days, the where I sleep question starts feeling almost irrelevant. Chapter 5. The Workaholic Life. 80-hour weeks and floor naps. Elon Musk's daily routine is legitimately unhinged, and it explains why housing barely matters to him. He sleeps around 6 hours per night, usually going to bed between 2 and 3 a.m., waking around 8 or 9 a.m. First thing he does? Grabs his phone and starts scrolling. Emails, company updates, what's trending on X, Tesla stock movement, SpaceX developments. Before his feet hit the floor, he's already working. Breakfast is minimal or skipped entirely. Coffee, maybe some eggs if he remembers. Lunch frequently gets ignored or eaten while in meetings. Food is fuel, not enjoyment. The priority is always work. He works 12 to 14 hours daily as baseline, sometimes pushing past 16 during critical periods. The concept of weekends doesn't exist. Sunday feels identical to Monday. He's openly said he averages 80 to 100 hours weekly, and during production ramps or launch preparations, that number climbs even higher. His schedule involves constant switching between companies. Morning might be Tesla production meetings in Austin. Afternoon could shift to SpaceX engineering reviews at Starbase or Hawthorne. Evening might involve X policy discussions or Neuralink progress updates. He physically moves between facilities, sometimes flying his private jet multiple times in a single day to be wherever problems demand immediate attention. At Starbase, the intensity multiplies. If there's a rocket test scheduled for 2 a.m., Elon will be standing on the launch pad with engineers, watching every detail. When things fail, and in rocket development, things fail constantly, he'll stay up all night working through solutions, reviewing data, making calls, adjusting plans. There are stories of Elon sleeping on factory floors during Model 3 production hell, crashing on office couches during critical deadlines, even napping on the ground when exhaustion finally overwhelms him. Sleep happens wherever he is when his body shuts down. Family time exists but is limited. With 14 kids across multiple relationships, logistics are genuinely complicated. When he does spend time with them, it's often integrated into work, bringing some to SpaceX launches, showing them Cybertruck prototypes, explaining engineering problems during what counts as quality time. Exercise? Minimal. Elon has joked about being in okay shape, but not prioritizing fitness beyond what's necessary to function. His diet is notoriously unhealthy. fast food, Diet Coke, whatever's convenient when hunger interrupts work. Critics call this lifestyle unsustainable, a recipe for burnout and health disasters. Supporters argue it's exactly why Elon accomplishes things others don't, because he's willing to sacrifice everything else for the mission. But here's what's clear. Whether he's sleeping in a $50,000 prefab box or a $12 million Austin mansion, the surroundings barely register. He's either working, traveling between work sites, or unconscious from exhaustion before immediately working again. The simple living narrative fits because luxury requires time to enjoy, and Elon doesn't have that time or refuses to allocate it that way. But while his personal lifestyle seems minimal, the empire he's built in Texas is anything but small. Chapter 6. Owning a City. Elon's Grip on Texas. Here's where the owns a city part stops being metaphor and starts becoming literal. Starbase in Boca Chica was a dying village before SpaceX arrived. Now Elon is actively trying to incorporate it as an official city called Starbase, Texas. Local officials pushed back on the incorporation attempt, but the transformation is happening regardless of legal recognition. SpaceX employs thousands at the facility. Workers have moved in from across the country, drawn by high-paying jobs building rockets. Housing developments have sprung up. Restaurants, shops, services, all emerging to support the growing population that exists solely because Elon decided to build rockets there. The economic impact is staggering. What was a sleepy, economically depressed region is now booming, entirely because one man chose it as his rocket testing ground. In Austin, the effect is even more dramatic. Tesla's Gigafactory employs over 20,000 people. The Boring Company tests tunnels. Neuralink has facilities. The entire tech ecosystem around Austin has exploded, partly because Elon's presence attracts other companies, investors, engineers, entrepreneurs who want proximity to what he's building. Real estate prices in Austin have skyrocketed. Areas near Gigafactory that were affordable middle-class neighborhoods are now expensive, with property values climbing as demand from Tesla workers floods the market. Elon's influence extends into politics too. Texas Governor Greg Abbott has openly courted him, offering tax incentives and regulatory flexibility to keep his companies expanding in-state. When Elon speaks, Texas politicians listen because his companies represent billions in economic activity and tens of thousands of jobs. This is power that transcends normal wealth. Elon doesn't just have money. He controls economic levers affecting entire regions. He decides where factories get built, where jobs get created, where infrastructure develops. And unlike traditional billionaires who might own sports teams or media companies, Elon's empire is industrial: rockets, cars, energy systems, tunneling infrastructure. Physical things requiring land, workers, supply chains. That makes his influence harder to ignore and impossible to regulate without destroying the economic benefits he brings. Texas rolled out the red carpet, and Elon has used that welcome to build something unprecedented. A private industrial empire so deeply embedded in the state's economy that it's become inseparable from Texas's identity as a business-friendly destination. And while politicians celebrate the jobs and growth, neighbors in quiet Austin neighborhoods are realizing what it means when the richest man in the world decides your block is where his family should live. Chapter 7. The Car Situation. Cybertrucks and Contradictions. You'd think the world's richest man would have a garage full of Ferraris and Lamborghinis. But Elon's car situation is completely on brand and completely weird. His daily driver? The Tesla Cybertruck. He's constantly photographed in one around Starbase, Austin, at Tesla events. It's practical for rough terrain, futuristic-looking, fully electric, and serves as a rolling advertisement for Tesla's most polarizing product. Beyond that, he owns various Tesla models: Model S, Model X, Model Y. These aren't collector's items. They're the cars he actually uses, the vehicles his company produces, the technology he personally oversees. In the past, Elon owned genuinely cool cars. He had a McLaren F1, which he famously crashed and destroyed. He owned the Lotus Esprit submarine car from a James Bond film, actually bought the movie prop. He had a Porsche 911 and other gas-powered performance vehicles. But over time, he sold or stopped using them. The message was deliberate. If you're trying to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy, driving gas guzzlers sends the wrong signal. So now his collection consists almost entirely of Teslas. Functional, electric, mission-aligned. It's the same philosophy as his housing. Tools, not toys. Cars exist to move from point A to point B, not to display wealth. But while Elon's personal consumption appears minimal, his actual wealth and influence paint a very different picture. Chapter 8. The Empire Beyond the Box. Now, let's talk about what Elon's wealth actually looks like, because the numbers are genuinely insane. By 2024, Elon Musk's net worth fluctuates between $400 billion and $450 billion depending on Tesla's stock price. That makes him not just the richest person in the world, but potentially the richest person in human history when adjusted for modern currency. Most of that wealth isn't cash sitting in bank accounts. It's tied up in Tesla stock, SpaceX equity, and stakes in his other companies. But the scale is still incomprehensible. His net worth increases or decreases by billions in a single day based on market movements. Tesla alone is worth over $1 trillion at times, and Elon owns roughly 13% of it. SpaceX, still private, is valued around $180 billion, and Elon owns approximately 42%. Those two companies account for the overwhelming majority of his wealth. But the income streams extend far beyond stock value. Tesla generates over $90 billion in annual revenue. SpaceX pulls in billions from NASA contracts, Starlink internet subscriptions, and commercial satellite launches. Neuralink, xAI, the Boring Company, each represents billions in potential future value. And then there's X, formerly Twitter, which Elon bought for $44 billion in 2022. The platform's value has dropped significantly since the purchase, but Elon controls one of the world's most influential communication networks, giving him cultural and political power that transcends money. So when Elon says he lives in a $50,000 house, technically it might be true. But the full picture includes private jets, multiple properties, admit it or not, access to any resource he needs anywhere in the world, and influence over industries, governments, and millions of lives. The simple living narrative serves a purpose. It reinforces his brand as mission-focused rather than materialistic. It separates him from other billionaires who flaunt wealth. And it aligns with his public persona as the hardest-working person in any room. But the reality is more complicated. Managing 14 children requires infrastructure. Running companies across multiple states requires flexible accommodations. And someone worth $400 billion has resources to make life comfortable even if they don't display that comfort publicly. The Austin compound reports are probably accurate in broad strokes, even if specific details get exaggerated. Elon likely has set up housing allowing his various family situations to coexist in proximity. That's not frivolous luxury, it's logistics. The Starbase prefab box is real, but it's one piece of a much larger system that includes whatever he needs, whenever he needs it, wherever critical work demands his presence. And the Texas Empire itself? That's absolutely real. Elon has reshaped multiple regions of the state, created tens of thousands of jobs, influenced policy, and built industrial infrastructure that will outlast him. The question isn't whether Elon lives luxuriously. It's whether luxury even matters to someone whose entire existence revolves around work. When you're sleeping in offices, eating in meetings, and spending every waking hour solving problems most people can't comprehend, does the house you technically own actually matter? For Elon, the answer seems to be, not really. The work is the thing. The mission is the thing. Everything else, houses, cars, possessions, is just infrastructure supporting that mission. But make no mistake, he's built an empire in Texas extending far beyond any single property. He doesn't just own houses. He owns influence, economic power, and control over his environment that most people can't imagine. The richest man in the world living in a $50,000 box makes a great headline. The reality, a network of properties, facilities, and influence reshaping an entire state is far more interesting. And honestly, that's the Elon Musk story in a nutshell. The public narrative is always simpler than the reality, and the reality is always more complex, more ambitious, and more focused on building the future than anyone expects. So, yeah, Elon might sleep in a tiny house near rockets sometimes, but he's also quietly building a Texas empire that'll shape the state's economy for decades, housing a family structure most people can't wrap their heads around, and wielding power that goes way beyond any mansion could ever represent. And with that note, we wrap this journey through Elon Musk's massive Texas real estate and his overall lifestyle. What part of this story fascinated you the most? Let us know in the comments. And for more such interesting videos like this, take a look at Global Status.